The Boondocker style of military boot was worn by US Navy sailors and more famously by US Marine Corps Marines in the Pacific campaign of World War II. This pair is called the TG or Great Escape Boondocker boots because you can see a pair worn by Steve McQueen in that movie. But wait, McQueen played a US Army Air Corps flyer downed over Europe. How did he get a pair of Boondockers? G'day, welcome back to Bootlosophy. If you're new here, my name is Tech and this is my channel about heritage boots and sometimes other heritage gear. I come to you from the Luosjiet lands in Western Australia, Kalyakor Wajak Nungabuja. So, the Great Escape. Steve McQueen played downed airman Captain Virgil Hiltz, a POW in Stalag Luft 3, nowhere near the Pacific Theatre. Why was he wearing a pair of Boondocker boots worn by the US Marines in the Pacific? In Europe in particular, airmen of the US Army Air Corps were mostly wearing A6 flying boots in their planes, which were softer and more comfortable on long flights and kept them warm in the upper altitudes. That's one of Hollywood costume design puzzles for our age that literally keeps nobody awake unless you're researching a boot called the Great Escape Boondocker. That's this boot, officially called the Luosjiet TG for the Great Escape Boondocker, no C, yellow-brown, oiled cowhide reverse, short hair. Long name. Essentially, it's a rough-out Boondocker boot, which from my research looks to me like a really good representation of an original World War II Boondocker, but more of that later. The brand Luosjiet is one that I've been aware of for some time, positively reviewed by many YouTube reviewers in the last couple of years. But I have avoided reviewing their boots despite the pricing because I had some concerns that some of their models looked almost exactly like some icons, like the Iron Ranger and the Red Wing Classic 875 Mock Toe. Then I reviewed their Indiana boot, another one that not only looked like an icon but was actually named after the icon. And actually I was taken aback by the quality it represented for the price. A quality exceeding that of the original in many, but not all respects. But you know, for that price, I'd sacrifice some aspects like say, Chinese chrome tan leather rather than chrome excel. Having liked the Indiana, I stopped looking at the brand with a jaundiced eye to try and see it for what it actually was. Now, I wasn't able to find the actual founding date, but it started appearing in late 2023, based in what was once known as the New Territories of the British Hong Kong colony, before that was handed back at the end of the 99-year lease in 1997. Since then, it's been part of China under a so-called Special Administrative Region arrangement. I don't mind their being based in China. As I've always said, good quality control is not about where you are, but about the intent of quality and what policies and procedures you put into place to ensure it. One of my favorite brands is Grant Stone, American company, manufactured in China. No one can complain about their quality of construction or materials. Luosjiet is a brand owned by a well thought of quality Chinese brand called XBXS, they make really high quality boots using top international leathers and sell for around $900 US for service boots and around $1,500 for engineers. After reviewing their Indiana and digging deeper, I think I've cracked their design and merchandising philosophy. When I reviewed the Indiana, I asked some of my friends who were diplomats serving in Beijing what the name meant. There was some disagreement, but they think, depending on how you pronounce it, Chinese language, it depends on pronunciation, they think it meant the lower level. Since then, I've asked others and they think it might mean unique or something similar. Now, being part of XBXS, I think they have set out to make more affordable boots while still subscribing to the XBXS ethos of quality manufacturing. So instead of designer fees, for example, maybe they opted for adopting styles very similar to iconic boots. Certainly, they tend to use leather from Prime Asia Leather, a tannery that have facilities in China and Southeast Asian countries. Don't think of this as a third world tannery. It's huge. It has big and public sustainability protocols, and Jonathan Clark, American CEO of Prime Leather, launched a rebrand focused on breakthrough design, operational excellence, conscious crafting, and global support. Their customers include some of the largest footwear companies from around the world. This second level of boot making means that as a conglomerate, they now have two brands that won't confuse their customers. One for high-end boots that would rival the best, and a second for the wider market. Okay, let's move on to this design. First, let me talk about the Boondocker. In this style of service boot, I'm a lot less wary about Luosjiet looking like an icon. The design is based on the World War II boot, and brands like Oak Street Bootmakers, John Lofgren, Iron Boots, and many, many others, including cheaper brands like Golden Fox, and even specialist brands making clothes for reenactors, all make a Boondocker style of boot. It's a boot style that is copied by everybody because it's a well-known style. The original Boondocker was introduced in 1941 to the Marines, officially known as the USMC Field Shoes, and replacing the original shiny, grain side-out Cordovan brogue cap toe garrison boots. It was a return to the rough-out boot that was previously used in World War I because of the capability of the rough-out leather to brush aside cuts and grazes in the field. Later, the Navy adopted similar field shoes, but often with a rivet, and even later, rough-out boots were adopted by the US Army. How they came to be named Boondockers is a reasonably long story. At the turn of the 19th to 20th century, during the Philippine-American War, the Marines adopted a Tagalog word, bundok, meaning inaccessible country, mountains, jungles, to mean the remote mountainous terrain that they were fighting in. This was later Americanized to the boondocks, meaning a remote place, like in, you're a hillbilly from the boondocks. In World War II, the word was then revitalized by the Marines again in the Philippines, and when the new rough-out boots for that type of terrain were issued, they called them Boondockers. This Luosjiet is, from my looking around at other representations, I think very close to the original in aesthetics. I'll walk you through it in relation to photos from a website I found called usww2uniforms.com. It is a 6-inch boot with a flat sole and a block heel. The last is not Army Boot Munson, but quite a sleek shape with an almond toe. There's also a flattened profile emphasized by the unstructured toe. Other representations I've seen are often built on a structured toe, so they show a rounded profile at the toe. It has a famous Boondocker single-piece backstay, wrapping from around the heel stiffener and then up the back of the boot. Again, other brands make a rough-out boot but often have a 2-piece backstay. The sole and the heel is rubber and is corded. The originals were made from chopped-up salvage tires mixed with chopped-up salvage rope, and when molded together creates a rubber that has these white bits showing through. The idea was that as the cord wore through underfoot, they would show and afford better grip on wet ship decks and in the jungles. The main difference between the Luosjiet TG Escape Boondocker and the original is that these are stitched down constructed, whereas the originals were Goodyear welted. I find this a really stylish boot. It's not professional office business casual, but it can be worn rugged as a rough-out boot. And it can also be smart casual in, say, jeans and a button-down and a smart navy blazer, or maybe chinos and a brown blazer, to wear to a casual office on a day out and about. Turning to construction, as I said, it is stitched down construction. This means that the uppers are firstly stitched together and then lasted over the shoe last, and when they're trained in that shape, the front end is flared out and stitched to the veg-tanned leather midsole and the rubber outsole. The midsole is about 5 millimeters thick and the rubber outsole about 10 millimeters thick. This stitch down has 2 rows of stitches. One of them just goes through the uppers and the midsole, and then the rubber outsole is glued on, and the second stitch goes through the uppers, midsole, and the outsole as well. The rubber corded outsole and block heel are proprietary products and look like Vibram's V-Bar outsoles. To my mind, they're slightly softer than Vibram's version, and even without the cord in the rubber showing through, plenty grippy already. Inside the boot, they use a veg tan insole to glue, stitch and nail everything to, and on top of that is another piece of leather full length as a comfort sock liner with a piece of foam sandwiched in from the heel to the arch. Despite it being a full grain rough out boot where the grain or smooth side is on the inside, the vamp is actually lined when really most makers wouldn't bother. On a really hot day, I did find it a bit hot in the vamp. The shaft is unlined, and that's where you can see the leather they use is Prime Asia's lychee Scotch grain leather. There's some variation, but depending on where I measure it, the leather is between 1.6 and 2 millimeters thick. Now this makes it soft and supple, but still sturdy enough for durable wear. The rough outside is a lovely ginger orange, and the short hair referred to in its long name means a shortish nap. There is another version called the long hair, which I guess has a hairier nap. The contrasting stitching matches to the original, and the stitching is really very neat and clean with triple stitching at the back and quadruple stitching at the quarters. The tongue is full grain out and was actually fully gusseted, stitched right to the top, and then had a couple of U-shaped cutouts at the corners. I actually found that uncomfortable on my foot, so I adjusted it, and I'll tell you about that when I talk about comfort. The hardware is painted brown at the front, all 7 eyelets and no speed hooks. And at the back though, you can see that it is brass and very nicely washed so that there are no scratchy bits to scratch your tongue. All in all, I really like the way it's put together. Now let's talk about sizing and comfort. Luosjiet lasts seem to vary, and so sizing might vary. I found the last used in the Indiana boot quite roomy in the forefront, but in the same size, this European 41.5, I find this last more snug. Not tight, but less sloppy at the forefoot. On their website, link below, they do have a sizing chart, but honestly, I find it's a bit misleading because they compare Red Wing sizes as if they were true US size with European and UK true sizes. We all should know by now that Red Wing sizes their boots a half size less than the true Brannock measured size. I am 8.5D on the Brannock, and I take Red Wing 8D. In the UK and Europe, most of their boot makers make boots true to size, so my US 8.5 true size equates to a UK 7.5 true size. Now that's a confusing way of saying take your usual size in boots like Red Wing, which is a half size down anyway. Better yet, get measured on a Brannock and then work out what that is in UK or European size and then take that size. Even better, contact Luosjiet and ask for their help. In terms of fit, I find the last used here to be very comfortable. I think, although it's not advertised as such, I do think it's a combination last, not unlike Parkhurst's 618 last, and I'll show you a picture here between the two. It feels narrow in the heel and waist and wide in the ball, and then narrowing without pain, because it's longer, into an almond toe. Looking down, you see a wider ball of foot area that disappears under your arch as it narrows, just like the Parkhurst 618. Comfort underfoot is really good. The softer rubber and the 2 pieces of leather, the mid and the insole, and the foam under the heel to the arch gives great shock absorption and good arch support underneath. There is one aspect that I found uncomfortable though. One of the impressive things I saw when I unboxed the boot was the fully gusseted tongue. It is fully gusseted, stitched up to the top, but with a deep U cut into it on both sides. On my feet, the U wasn't deep enough and I had to modify it. I'll just show you what I mean with this B-roll that I shot earlier before I modified the tongue. You see how the gusseting is right at the top, but they do a little cutout here so that it allows the tongue to fold. But what happens when you fold it? There's 2 ways of folding it. So one way is where you kind of you push this part into the corner, and so it looks like that, which is probably like the best way to do it aesthetically. The second way is do a kind of crazy Pacific Northwest fold like that, which doesn't look as good because obviously you're going to end up with a tongue that looks kind of squiggly. The problem is when you push that part in, you then have a
a fold of leather just there, like a really thick fold of leather, because this is quite a thick tongue. And that fold, when you lace up tight, really increases pressure right on the ankle bone. So as lovely as that is, I think that design, for me anyway, for my ankle bone, that cuts into my ankle bone just there and causes a lot of pressure. So I think what I'm going to have to do is like do a semi-gusset tongue and cut this down to there and then up to create a deeper V that allows me to kind of do that without having to fold this bit. I'm going to have to try that.
On my feet, this little cutout has made it actually a lot more comfortable now. To finish off this review, let's talk briefly about leather care. As this is a rough out, which is tougher than suede, there's actually not a lot you need to do. You should, of course, keep it clean. So in doing so, you use one of those stiffer suede brushes to brush off dirt and sand and to clean up the nap and get it going the right way. If it gets marked and you don't like it, you can use a suede eraser to spot clean the mark or use a suede spray cleaner. Do not use saddle soap. You need to make sure that it's specifically for suede and rough out. You can then spray it with a waterproofer, or if you want, there are suede and rough out conditioners in the market. Now, I usually don't bother conditioning suede or rough out. And finally, in terms of value, these are listed at $299 US. They have a variety of different Boondockers, so I suggest that when you go to their website, you use the search bar above and enter Boondocker without the C, and look at the different models that there are there. For $299 US, I think it's pretty impressive. The quality of construction is there, and maybe the materials are below the best grade leather, an outsole for example, but they're pretty good, and ultimately you get what you pay for. If you want Horween leather and Vibram, the Oak Street bootmaker's field shoe, their version of the Boondocker, is over $500 US. You get what you pay for, and sometimes you don't. In summary then, the TG Escape Boondocker is a pretty realistic version of the original USMC field shoe used in the Pacific War. It's put together with good materials and the construction is good, including a spick and span stitched down makeup, really neat, clean and accurate. Didn't like the tongue, but you can get used to it, I guess. All in all, one that could make its way into my favorites list. As for why a US Army Air Corps airman was wearing a Boondocker, who knows? Hey, to cap it off, I'd appreciate a like, and if not already, I'd love to see you sub. Click on those buttons below. I'm back next week, so take care, and I'll see you again soon.